BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Tuesday. It's time for True Crime Talk Radio, but this episode is going to be done a little bit differently. We're going to begin with some true crime material and then go into some more things about people reading. But first, I had a question that came in from I'm Not Paul Avery, that's the YouTube user, who had a question about the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. And the simple question was, why did you choose to give it that title, Killer on a White Horse? I often talk about it at the beginning of episodes, saying that it was inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is fictional, and the fictional killer in that story is called the White Horse Killer. And someone else also asked me, well, why didn't you just call the novel The White Horse Killer? And the reason why was because they talk so frequently about the White Horse Killer in the book. I wanted the title to have just a slightly different word arrangement. But yes, if anyone would like to read the full story, you can go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. And if you are going to approach it with expecting it to be inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, it's a very loose inspiration. It's not set on the West Coast like the Zodiac Killer and Charles Manson. It's set on the East Coast, and the majority of the activities take place in the state of Maryland as well as Pennsylvania. And you can join some people on their journey trying to solve somewhat of a complicated murder mystery, but because it is drawing upon these inspirations from the Zodiac Killer, there are also these taunting messages that are mailed in, and one of them talks about the white horse that William Cooper paid attention to, and William Cooper wrote the book Behold a Pale Horse, and I'll be talking a lot about him tomorrow on the AMA, so as always you can like and subscribe, follow along with all of these true crime discussions as well as things about psychology, or over the weekend I even did an episode talking about TV shows. Any subject is fair game here, especially for the Anything Goes segments on Fridays. And of course there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to have a look at some of the merchandise, and remember, being weird is not a crime. I would like to begin with something that is a follow-up, if you will, to a recent episode that came out talking about the Zodiac Killer and DNA. I've been corresponding a lot with Mike Rodelli, who is the author of the books In the Shadow of Mount Diablo and The Hunt for Zodiac. And before we go any further in the discussion, somebody sent me the greatest joke in the world, to just right here in the comment section on YouTube. What is Mike Rodelli's favorite restaurant? Mike Rodelli. I hope you're watching the screen because that's where it was posted. Otherwise, that won't make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, Mike Rodelli is the author of In the Shadow of Mount Diablo, as well as The Hunt for Zodiac, which was the ebook version. And he wrote a piece for BlackBoxOnlineRadio talking about the Zodiac Killer's DNA. And Rodelli has taken a very strong stance, saying he does not believe that the Zodiac's DNA has been found, that it is present on the envelopes that were mailed in with the Zodiac letters, particularly the ones in 1969, but the Zodiac communications went well into the 1970s. Some people think they ended in 1974, other people think they ended in 1978, and some people think that they went all the way into the new millennium. And Mike Rodelli has sent a couple messages into the email address BlackBoxOnlineRadio, as well as just responding in the comments section. First, he wanted to really make it clear what his stance on the forensic sciences surrounding the Zodiac Killer mystery is, and he said, incredibly, after hearing my expose, here is one of the comments. Either way, like you said, the Zodiac's DNA has to be on one of the letters in some way, since no matter how smart the Zodiac was, he wouldn't be able to predict that science would make a discovery of how to trace DNA. That was a comment that someone left on YouTube, and Mike Rodelli was rather shocked because his stance was absolutely to the contrary. And if anything, he said in the expose that he wrote for this show, and I read off in an episode, Do They Have the Zodiac Killer's DNA? That it's possible that whoever mailed the letters in the Zodiac after the Zodiac crimes was using a sponge and water to seal the envelope so there wouldn't even be saliva present as well as on the stamp. And Rodelli said, what can I add to this? Some people will just never get it. How can they even say this? The results from lab tests say there is virtually no saliva after 20 years and they can't find any DNA. The likely answer is that it is not there to be found. Who says the Zodiac predicted the advent of DNA science? And the reason why he's a little bit fired up about that is he said absolutely to the contrary in his essay. What I believe he wrote was that that the Zodiac could not have foreseen forensic science, but that wouldn't have altered his choice. I mean, just because he couldn't have foreseen the changes in forensic science, it doesn't mean that he was licking the stamps. I mean, there's no conclusive way to say that the person who mailed those letters ever licked the stamps or licked the envelopes. There was no saliva DNA present. Who says the Zodiac predicted the advent of DNA science? He didn't, but he still avoided licking the stamps and envelopes. That, I guess, would be the biggest nutshell version of that episode, but I would invite you to listen to it all the same. That is what science says. You just can't get through to some people, and that is signed Mike Rodelli. And in the comments section to the episode about do they have the Zodiac Killer's DNA, Mike Rodelli has also said, in about 2004, I received an email from a fellow Zodiac researcher named Ray Nixon, who was a big supporter of Arthur Lee Allen. He was also well connected in the SFPD. I had made the DNA update to the website that I had at the time, and Ray wrote to me to say that he could back up what I was saying about the stamps and envelopes not having been licked for 100%. He said that in 2002, when SFPD's lab was analyzing the Zodiac letters for DNA for the ABC show, they had verified the saliva findings of Alan Keel, and they agreed that the Zodiac did not lick the stamps and envelopes. So it is pretty much a given that the Zodiac did not lick his stamps and envelopes. It's just people, either out of ignorance or because of their own agendas, refuse to accept the reality. Like many people today, they are deniers who steadfastly hold on to invalid beliefs and refuse to accept facts and science. There is little that I can do about this. And I think he was, again, responding to that comment about how someone acted like they were agreeing with him, even though he said the exact opposite in his expose. And if you would like to hear the full episode on this channel, it's called Do They Have the Zodiac Killer's DNA? And I should also note that Mike Rodelli has written other essays for this program. He wrote one for the Lyndon Lafferty book discussion on the Zodiac Killer cover-up, also known as the Silence Badge, and also one about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Shel Cavale. You can find that under the episode title, Zodiac, Shel Cavale, AMA. Now, the term Zodiac is often discussed in Zodiac Killer material here on this channel, BlackBoxOnlineRadio, but some people use the word Zodiac for discussions about astrology, and then there's the Chinese Zodiac. And if you've ever been to a Chinese restaurant, when they have those placemats, and it shows the Chinese Zodiac and marriage compatibility, like, for example, if you're an ox, then you're supposed to marry a rat, a snake, or a rooster, or if just a so-so partner would be another ox, or if your Chinese zodiac sign is the tiger, then you're supposed to marry a dragon, a horse, or a pig. My sign is the dragon, 1988. It's spring of 1988, actually. That also is important to note because the Chinese cycle doesn't completely go around the calendar years. They follow the Lunar New Year, and I knew a guy who was born in 1988, like January something something, and he said he spent his whole life thinking that he was a dragon, but then it turned out that he was a rabbit. And my sign, the dragon, you're supposed to marry a rooster, a rat, or a monkey. I certainly don't want to marry a rat. But are these actually effective ways at reading people? On this channel, as well as the other channel, AstroPsych 400, which I am also the host of, I talk a lot about not exactly people reading, but evaluating other people's personality traits. And since 2018, I've been reading a lot about the big five personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, represented by the acronym OCEAN. And then one of my own original observations was people do not seem to be partnering the big five personality traits with the anatomy of love, which is by Dr. Helen Fisher, and that talks about there are four governing components of brain chemistry. There is dopamine centered, serotonin centered, estrogen centered, and testosterone centered. And I totally give my own interpretation of the anatomy of love. But if you're dopamine centered, then you do things to fuel your own excitement. If you are serotonin centered, you do things to fuel social surroundings and well-being and such. And then if you are estrogen or testosterone centered, estrogen centered would be more about thoughtfulness and introspection. Testosterone centered is more about assertiveness. But I don't think that these types of personality trait recorders are the be all end all of human existence. And since 2019, I've definitely been learning more about Sigmund Freud and the whole concept of how your parents' behavior towards you between the ages of 0 and 4 models not only your behavior, not only your personality, but also your sexuality. However, though, I have found that since I started learning about Freud and Jung and B.F. Skinner in my adult years, that it's really affected my true crime thinking not in a good way. I felt that as someone who was just a guy who was watching true crime documentaries and listening to podcasts and reading articles like anybody else, who was just making connections and observations. Okay, you notice the commonalities among these criminals or among serial killers, that all serial killers seem to have these types of very, very well defined features. I found that once I began to learn more about traditional psychology, my thinking was altered in a bad way, as opposed to just like watching a bunch of forensic files and you're like, hey, I'm noticing major patterns, trends, and similarities. There really is something to be said for a fresh take on the subject where the outside eyes can have the best view of the game. But about how you can read people, definitely I do think about someone in terms of how they have interacted with their parents. Like, if someone is rejecting gentleness, then they have a problem with their mother. If someone is rejecting control, then they have a problem with their father. And you can definitely learn how this can fall into place in a relationship, because some people are going to be very, very much opposed to having anyone tell them what to do, and then other people are going to be not really wanting to bond with their partner. They're going to try and push them away, or they might do something that Freud definitely talked about they seek somebody out for sexual reasons, and then they just end up pushing them away because they feel that they are not worthy. And you begin to notice these types of behaviors. But the one that I would really like to talk about today is something that I was reminded of again from 2018. I was listening to a discussion with Jordan Peterson and Camille Paglia that was posted on YouTube, one of the more popular videos that he had at the time, but he has definitely had some videos surpass that. And they talked about the writer Eric Neumann, as well as something that you can use to read people, and that is the spectrum of benevolence and tyranny. And I was talking about this back in 2018 to someone who didn't speak English very well, and they said, benevolence? What is benevolence? Tyranny? What is tyranny? And I tried to explain it using the words nice and control, but maybe that isn't the most perfect definition of benevolence. Our dictionary says it's the quality of being well meaning, kindness. And tyranny would be cruel or oppressive or ruling, because I think when they're talking about this in the concept of how someone would behave toward other people, I think they just definitely mean more about the ruling aspect of it, the controlling aspect, whereas tyrannical behavior is definitely something we use to discuss politicians with, but you can apply this to the way that parents act toward children, which that conversation on YouTube was talking about the behavior of parents, about how parents can function on a spectrum of benevolence and tyranny. But it isn't only about parents. It can also take place between friends, between significant others, between co-workers. It can take place among any number of people. And you begin to notice this, that some people are very controlling and other people are very warm and compassionate, and they aren't necessarily trying to dominate the other person in a conscious way, whereas other people will develop a sense of sadism, but only release it in emotional ways. They just will try to rig the system so that they are constantly in control of all the other person's decisions. And we have a lot of labels for that type of behavior. Toxic personalities. But a lot of that toxic behavior stems from tyranny, someone else's desire to control another person, but not in a well-meaning way. Narcissism is also a term that is used very frequently, and back in 2020 I did an episode talking about sociopaths in the media, about how when many people use the word sociopath, they don't even mean that somebody is a clinical sociopath, they just mean that somebody is a jerk. And it's the same with narcissism now, that people aren't even talking about clinical narcissism all the time. Like if you go through a lot of these YouTube channels about psychology where they're talking about how do you deal with narcissists in your life, they pretty much just mean jerks. So, what's the real answer? I really find, though, that if we just view somebody in your personal life on that spectrum of benevolence and tyranny, how do they fit in? Are they extremely controlling? Or are they just very warm and compassionate? Do they actually try to seek out well-being for not only themselves but also for you? Or do they just want to tell you what to do? I find that some people will have an absolute disconnect from something like the Big Five personality traits and the spectrum of benevolence and tyranny. For example, someone can be very extroverted but still be very pleasant and kind and generous. And also, someone can be very open-minded but still be tyrannical. And I began to notice a set of behaviors that seemed very repetitive in my life from people that I had known over the past 10, 15 years. And they would start out being very friendly. They would start out being, very talkative. They would have an open-minded sense of humor. Oh yeah, horrible things in the world are happening. Ah ha ha. Let's find humor in them because that's good. Let's talk about Comedy Central and Cartoon Network and anything under the sun. But the more time that I spent with them, the more controlling that they would get, or they would find humor in the same type of material as before. But if somebody else were to talk about that, oh no, you shouldn't say that. And then it goes beyond the recommendation. Hey, don't do that. Watch your language. Watch what you say. But we used to joke about this stuff all the time. No, just simply don't do that. And they get closer and closer to the tyrannical end of the spectrum. And it becomes more about control. And I'm fully aware that we live in a world of power. But I was so baffled about how someone would forget that type of experiences that we had together. Well, you used to think that it was funny. We used to talk about these things, and we used to use all types of language. Just the more time you spend with someone, the more they were trying to dominate. And I do think that people need to firstly be aware of someone else's personality traits. Are they very extroverted? Or are they very neurotic? Like, do they have lots of repetitive thinking that is making them worry about things? But then be aware of their governing component of brain chemistry. Are they doing things that fuel their own excitement? Or are they doing things for the social surroundings? And also be aware of how are they just trying to do something to be kind for the sake of being kind because they just want to experience kind behavior and they want you to experience the actions of kindness? Or are they trying to be controlling. And again, it doesn't matter if someone's open-minded about something. They could be the most open-minded, progressive person in the world, yet they're still going to be very, very controlling when it comes to certain choices in life. The more opportunities they have to control somebody, the more they're going to seize those opportunities, and then it just becomes about domination. But here is something that I will genuinely never understand. How on earth could somebody keep someone in their life that they don't like just to dominate them? I mean, that is just, it makes no sense to me, but lots of people do that. Lots of people are in relationships with someone that they don't like that much, and they just choose to keep the person around for momentary domination, or even regular domination, and it turns into that type of emotional sadism. But I was also observing several behaviors among certain people that are genuine cases of sadomasochism. And it's that not only do they want other people to feel bad, they also create a lot of misery in their own life and their own situations. And it's just that they're just spreading misery to everyone. And instead of trying to build positive relationships, they'll be nasty to people when they think they can get away with it, and they will also just wallow in their own misery. I'm nasty to everybody around me. Oh, wait, why don't I have any friends? Well, it's everybody else's fault. Well, why don't you do something to improve your life so you can actually get all of the things that you want, or the relationship status that you want, or the goals that you want to achieve? No, I can't. The world is against me. Therefore, I must be against the world. And it turns into a type of emotional sadomasochism. But as far as operating on the spectrum of benevolence and tyranny, or as I said before, nice and control, but maybe some more appropriate terms would be kindness and arbitrary controlling behaviors. There is definitely some experiences with what Free Domain Radio called people who don't have values. Have you ever known somebody who would just tolerate and accept behavior from one person, and then if somebody else did it, they would get very emotional, and they'd be like, oh, if that person's doing the same type of behaviors, well, I need to tell them to stop. And the other person who is allowed to do those behaviors is someone that they can't control. Their person is just out of control, so then they appease the most volatile. And this is a type of behavior that happens all the time. I mean, especially when you think back all the way to elementary school and junior high, whether it's teachers or your classmates, or maybe if it's even members of your own family. And I said Free Domain Radio because that was where I learned the full phrase that some people appease the most volatile, and they push other people around when they can get away with it. That's what you do when you don't have values, because that's just it. It means that it's not about the value, it's just about controlling people when they have the opportunities to. And I did an episode on this channel last year where I was doing a few things about BBOR psychology, and it was actually the first one where I introduced the concept of a red berry personality, and it was all about how red berry personalities are hierarchy oriented. If somebody thinks that someone is above them in terms of social status, they will act like a servant, they will just cater to that person's every need. If they think that someone else is below them, they expect that other person to serve them. It's like, no, I work for the cool guy, you need to work for me. And that can lead to a lot of toxic behaviors, narcissism, as well as just tyrannical behavior that we've been talking about in this episode. But since I did that episode about the what I called fruit psychology, red berries and blueberries, I've noticed that type of behavior time and time again. And the thing about a red berry personality is that they are often the most manipulative person in the group. And I do have to cite Paul Watkins's book for that type of thinking when he said that the slowest person in the group can be the most manipulative because they make other people wait for them. They're the ones who are always going to be showing up late, or they're going to take the longest to get ready, or that they are going to make other people respond to their actions. And it's just a constant test of trying to get away with behaviors that make other people respond to them. Is this person actually going to wait for me? Is this person actually going to tolerate my unfair behavior? So that's goes into the red berry category, but I said blueberries briefly. A blueberry personality is someone who is mostly a social pariah, but they are very emotional, and once they get somebody in their life, they then start being mean to that person. They start projecting rude, unkind, and tyrannical behaviors toward whoever comes into their life. The term supply is often used as opposed to partnership, and the reason why they do this is they've been rejected from society and people have been mean to them, so they're like, okay, well, this is my example of a successful person, someone who is mean. And then they're like, okay, I have somebody in my life now. Now I have somebody to be mean to the way that other people were mean to me. And once you begin to notice patterns in these types of behaviors, you see that it's not arbitrary. It's not coming from absolutely nowhere. Firstly, a lot of it does come from people's parents. It also comes from their belief systems, and it can come from the values that we were talking about or the lack thereof. But a lot of it is that people have learned how to manipulate, because almost every red berry personality that I've met over the years has been someone of above average intelligence, but they're actively and patiently and deliberately trying to manipulate the entire time. Some people are trying to manipulate and they don't even know what they're doing. They think that they can just coast their way to the top of any dominance hierarchy. But the Redberry personality is, I know everything that's going on. I'm paying attention to the actions of other people. I can push this person around and I can get away with it. Oh, I can't push this person around, so I'm going to act like a kiss ass to them. But when I did that episode on the fruit psychology, someone responded by saying, I absolutely agree with you about the red berry personalities, because they broke it down this way. The number 2 in the group is going to say, there's no way I can ever be number 1. There's no way I can ever be the top person. I can't be the queen bee or the king. So I'm just going to stay in the number 2 position, and I'm just going to kind of honor that person as opposed to actually trying to succeed on my own or to create one's own hierarchy. They're just going to be a kiss ass to the king, and then they're going to try and keep everybody else down so that they don't take away their social status. But that's bad, because that's horribly dehumanizing to other people. So in terms of people reading, I think that there is a very large desire for power. I think that most people are always trying to manipulate. Some people do it unconsciously, other people do it very consciously. And you really can gauge people's personalities by looking at them on the spectrum of benevolence and tyranny, on the spectrum of kindness and cruel control. And you can see, is somebody being very extroverted, or are they being very assertive? If they're assertive, then they are going to be more testosterone centered. And when you put all of these components together, you can learn how people are functioning and why they are making the choices that they are making. So I once knew somebody whom I used to say he was high in all of the personality traits, like on the anatomy of love, even about serotonin centered, dopamine centered, testosterone centered, and estrogen centered. But then I had to make the realization that no, he's not serotonin centered. He is just extroverted from the big 5 and dopamine centered from the anatomy of love. He's very outgoing, and he is also doing things that fuel his own excitement, paying absolutely no attention to the actions of other people and the behaviors of other people. He is just like, I like this and I like that, and I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to talk to everyone, and I'm going to be loud and I'm going to be obnoxious and I'm going to be brash, and that's it. That's it. That's just all he did for the entirety of his life, and people couldn't stand to be around him. And I noticed that type of behavior is very present with many people, because this is going to sound weird, but back when I was in high school, I just told somebody once, why is it that everyone who has no friends wants to be my friend? The person who doesn't have any friends is always coming up and asking me, hey, come on, dude, can I sit with you? And I was like, I noticed that in the lunchroom, this was only happening to me. It didn't seem like this was happening to many other people. Well, it's just that. It's just that. Someone is very extroverted. They are also dopamine centered, maybe testosterone centered if they're being assertive, but they are going to just go toward anyone who is trying to be closer on the end of the benevolence spectrum, or they're like, oh, this person isn't going to say no to me, so I'm going to talk to this person. I need somewhere to sit, and I'm just going to run my mouth nonstop because this other person isn't going to do anything. And if someone is actually going to do something, then I'm going to appease their volatile behavior, and I'm going to push people around when I can get away with it, and it's just going to be an absolute fueling of one's own neurochemistry. But they have absolutely no idea that those things are going on. I mean, when we're children, we don't think about which components of my brain are requiring me to do this and that. But the final tactic when it comes to people reading that I will share with you is from a show that I used to watch called Hey Bitch. And I think their channel was called Hey Bitch, but their videos kept getting demonetized, so they changed it to Big Mood. And there was a woman who was a guest on that show, and she said that the way that you want to structure a relationship is based on sensitivity. Like, the thing you actually want to match in a relationship is your sensitivity level. And that's not a psychological test or something like that, how sensitive is somebody's personality. But it means that you can't use the big five. You can't use the anatomy of love. You can't use red berries and blueberries and lemons and limes. How would you actually structure the functioning of a relationship? And she said sensitivity levels, meaning that sensitive people should be with sensitive people and insensitive people should be with insensitive people. And once I heard that, I mean, I didn't need a second more to think about it. I was like, yes, absolutely. For the following reason: if a sensitive person is in a relationship with an insensitive person, then what's going to happen one day is the sensitive person comes home from work and they say, oh, I lost my job. And the insensitive person is going to be like, oh no, did you make a mistake? And the sensitive person is just going to feel devastated, heartbroken, betrayed. Oh, how dare you say that about me? How do you know it's my fault? I said I lost my job. I didn't say that I was fired for any particular reason. And they're going to view that as some type of personal attack, whereas if someone is insensitive, they would probably be quicker to dismiss something like that, or they're just going to have a more balanced back and forth in terms of exchanging insensitive ideas, whereas the sensitive people are mostly going to try and avoid those types of behaviors, and they're maybe sometimes, but not all the time, because that's not how they would view a successful relationship, saying brash, blunt, and uncalculated statements. But that can be a great challenge question for you guys in the audience. How do you think a relationship should be structured? Like, what is the most important tactic in arranging a relationship? I mean, that channel said very clearly sensitivity levels, but what do you think? Do you think it's about the big five personality traits, or the anatomy of love, or do you think it's about ambitions, or about commitment? Like, because somebody told me that once. They said, Ned, how long were your parents together before they got divorced? And I said 11 years. I didn't actually know. It was actually more like 16 years. I thought my parents met in 1984, but they actually met in the 70s. I mean, I wasn't born yet. Of course, I didn't really know what's going on, but they were actually together about well over 10 years. They were married for 11 years, though, I can say that. And then they got divorced, and then I moved to West Virginia, and I grew up as a West Virginian. But someone said, okay, so your parents were married for 11 years. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And they were like, that means that just because you spend a lot of time with somebody doesn't mean you're going to be closer to them emotionally. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a stronger bond with someone just because you spend 11 years with them. I mean, why not 5 years or 16 years? People are married for 35 years or 40 years and then they get divorced. It's not about how much time you spend with that person. It's about commitment. It's about agreement. It's about making that choice that this is what you're going to do with somebody else. And that might be the only intelligent thing that I ever heard from that particular person, but it's always stayed with me. And I was just talking about the show Hey Bitch, which again has now been on the Big Mood channel. I do think they renamed for that. They alluded to that in some of their episodes. I haven't watched regularly since 2020. But I just wanted to leave you guys with one thing, because I said this in an episode once called Why Do Women Like Jerks? And let's be clear, women do not like jerks. I want to be very clear about that. But what I said is that on Hey Bitch, if you want to know how a woman thinks, to all you men out there, if you want to know how a woman thinks, or if you don't care how a woman thinks, how is she operating in a relationship? Like, what's her thought process like? Then that show just broke it down so easily. Or they just openly revealed it. Like, all the things that men would be suspicious about, they just flat out shared it with us. When they say stuff like, no, you don't want to date a nice guy. That's going to be boring. You want to go out and you want to find some guy that is, like, absolutely terrible for you, but then you want to have passionate sex with him for one night and never speak to him again, because if you do, he's going to destroy you. Yeah, you're attracted to him, but you never want to see him again because he's a terrible person. And they would just say stuff like that, and people in the comments section would say stuff like, I know this is a show that I'm supposed to listen to, but I always feel like I'm accidentally overhearing somebody's conversation. And somebody also brought up the point about, yeah, but don't you ever want to meet like a boring nice guy and then just give him a wonderful experience and you're going to be a legend in his mind until the end of time? And the response is, no, you can't do that. He will start stalking you. And they just say all the things that guys mostly know, but there are a few more confirming points. Or even though sometimes, one person said is that there are multiple people on the show sharing something to the effect of, okay, another reason why you don't go after a boring nice guy is you send him a text in the middle of the night, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like really horny and stuff, and I'm like, why don't you come over? And the nice guy just says, nah, I'm tired, I have work in the morning. And I was like, dude, this is your chance to get out of the friend zone, and you're just not seizing the opportunities. And things that do not require an enormous amount of imagination, but they do lay it all out there. And that isn't so much about people reading, that's just about reading between the lines, and then you find out that there actually is this message that is in between the lines, and that there is a type of secret knowledge that women have, but a lot of men's suspicions about them can genuinely be right. Okay, well, thank you to everybody for listening to this episode here, and you can always weigh in the comment section if you have any comments at all about any of the subjects that have been discussed in this episode, whether it was the Zodiac Killer or personality traits in people reading. Please put your ideas down in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, as well as all the links to the Teespring page and Amazon.com. And you can find me on Instagram at BlackBoxNid88. And I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.